Hello there. Indeed, my name is Eemi, and I come from the computational physics lab in Tampere University. And I'm here today to talk to you about our efforts and recent findings in capturing and transferring expressive microtiming in drumming. Quick disclaimer, I will be talking about drummers specifically, but the psychoacoustic stuff will be applicable to any sort of musician. Well, I thought a good place to start would be to define the thing we're actually trying to capture and transfer. So what is microtiming and what makes it expressive? So here we have your very basic eighth note drum beat, probably one of the first, if not the first, drum beats any beginning drummer will learn. I sure did back in the day. 4/4 time signature, 8 beats per bar or 8 hits per bar. We got the hi-hats, the snares, the bass drums, basic stuff. Now, this notation, at least to me, seems to imply that the time difference between each consecutive hi-hat hit or the inter-onset intervals, that they're equal. And of course, that is true. But is it though? Turns out, if we take a recording of someone playing this beat and we zoom in, really zoom in, they're not equal at all. When the human body produces any sort of rhythm, be it heartbeat or footsteps or a drum beat, it will never be perfectly steady. No matter how hard you try to maintain a steady beat, there will be variations or these millisecond scale deviations from the perfectly steady. Now, of course, since these eighth notes are probably in the ballpark of hundreds of milliseconds apart, usually, plus minus a couple of milliseconds doesn't seem like much. And it really doesn't change fundamentally what the rhythm is, but it does change how it sounds, just a little bit. And that is microtiming, the magic of human groove. Those small deviations from the perfect. Now, what makes it expressive is when a trained drummer can manipulate that microtiming in order to create a certain feel into the beat. We're talking a laid-back snare hit, or a sense of rushing without actually increasing the tempo, or this slight shuffle feel while not really playing triplets. That kind of stuff. And a good way to highlight the effects of expressive microtiming, I think, is this quote from the late great Jeff Porcaro, arguably one of the greatest drummers to ever live, talking about a 16th note drum beat and whether he prefers to play the hi-hat two-handed or one-handed. Porcaro said, "I like the single-handed method because it's a lot smoother feel. For instance, in the Michael McDonald record, I Keep Forgetting, I tried doing the alternating stroke method of doing 16ths and it sounded just too stiff and staccato for me." So he's talking about two ways of playing the exact same beat, and the results are completely different, or they sound completely different. And I'd like you to pay attention to the language Porcaro uses while talking about this. He says, smoother feel, too stiff and staccato. These are feelings and experiences you can describe, you can verbalize them, but you can't really unambiguously express this stuff in the standard drum notation. Expressive microtiming. However, as you probably know, when we generate a rhythm on a computer, it does not groove like a human. As far as the rhythm is concerned, a computer plays perfectly. But that's exactly the problem. Human playing is never perfect. And it's in those imperfections that the groove and feel are hiding. So what can we do to humanize these drum beats, machine-generated drum beats? Surely just introduce some randomness, variations in the hits, and we're done, right? Well, no, it's not that simple. You see, the human randomness is not really truly random, as in white noise. Instead, the human randomness is what we call pink noise, or 1/f noise, or long-range correlated noise. And the difference is, as you can see here, whereas in white noise, the values are completely uncorrelated, in pink noise, we can see some sort of structure in that time series. So in pink noise, the values do depend on previous values of the time series, just a little bit, although not nearly as much as in brown noise. But can there really be that big of a difference between white and pink noise? Believe it or not, yes. The human ear does hear the difference, and furthermore, tends to prefer pink noise, at least in a musical context. There was a study conducted in 2011 where the researchers produced two different versions of a musical piece. The only difference being that in one version, the instrument tracks were humanized using white noise, and in the other, pink. These versions were then played back to test subjects, and it turns out 79%, 4 out of 5, roughly, could hear a difference between the two humanization methods. Furthermore, when asked which they prefer to listen to, almost 2/3 claimed to prefer the pink noise humanized version. There was a similar study conducted just recently here in Finland. Anyway, back home in Finland, by my colleagues, Otto Pulkkinen and Professor Esa Räsänen, where they had a drum beat, recording of a drum beat, recorded by a professional jazz musician. And by manipulating the interons at intervals in that beat, they created 3 versions. There was the original version with no modifications whatsoever. Then the reversed version, where they changed up the interons at intervals so that whichever interons at interval was between the first 2 hits was now between the last 2 hits, and vice versa, and so on. And finally, the permuted version, where all the hits or the intervals were completely shuffled around. Then these versions were anonymously played to test subjects, and they were asked to identify which they thought was most and least likely to be the original recording. Once again, 80%, 4 out of 5 people did spot or did pick out the permuted version as least likely to be the original. It sounded, there was something weird. It did not sound like it was played by a human. Also, roughly half could recognize the original as the original, and a third said that the reversed version sounded like the original. To be fair, those 2 versions do sound extremely alike, which I think makes sense, since even though in the reversed version the intervals were reversed, they were in the same order still. So all the intervals were still next to the same intervals as they were in the original version. So I think it would maintain this certain flow in the beat. Okay, so to recap what we talked about so far, you can generate drum beats on a grid, but they will sound lifeless and robotic. And if you work with such audio tracks, you might want to humanize them somehow to make them sound better. And traditionally, there are many ways of doing this. You can manually go to your DAW and shift those notes around, but that is obviously very slow and tedious, and it still doesn't result in the same groove as you would get by actually recording it. You can humanize with white noise, but as has been established, that really doesn't convey the human way of playing. You can humanize with pink noise, which is better, but it still just gives you, pink noise humanization gives you the bare minimum of human groove, but there's still no expressive elements to it. But not to worry. I'm here to tell you that we have found an even better solution. What we do is utilize the Wing-Kristofferson model for discrete motor responses. This was introduced in the 70s to describe the behavior in human tapping. And in this model, the time interval between hits, consecutive hits, consists of a cognitive component, so what the drummer intends the interons at interval to be, but also these motor deviations, which result from the fact that the human body is a very complex biological system, and there will be lag if you try to with a tap. So to tie this into what I've talked about previously, the motor deviations give us human microtiming. Adding the cognitive component makes it expressive. And by expanding this model to multiple limbs, we can even better represent the way human plays drums, since usually drummers use up to 4 limbs at a time. Okay, but what do we do with this model? First, we need data. This is a graphic representation of a recording of a certain drum beat. These 8 clusters correspond to, yep, you guessed it, this guy from before. And on the y-axis, we have the change in interonsonant intervals, so how much those intervals differ from the average, marked here at 0 level. There are roughly 100 bars of this recording overlaid in this graph, and looking at it, we can certainly see some patterns. The first and fifth hits, so the ones with the bass drum, the interval after that tends to be clearly longer. Also, the hits leading up to those bass drum hits, the fourth and eighth, shorter than average. Okay, so we have a recording, we have this kind of a sample recording of a drummer maintaining a certain groove. And using that, we can train a machine learning model to then produce similar grooves on demand. Not the same, but similar, with the same feel. And I want to stress this is not a generative AI model in the modern sense. This is a completely white box solution, and the parameters can be tweaked even after the model has been created. And that brings us to Project Humu, our project at Tampere University. We are funded by Business Finland, and our goal is to find the best way to bring these findings to the masses, be it our own plugin or some other way of incorporating this know-how into existing DAWs, groove boxes, you name it. We have launched an online demo accessible through that QR code, which showcases what we've found. There's a way to play around with various different grooves. You can change tempo, the degree of humanization. And we would very much like to gather feedback at this point, so we're very interested to hear what, for example, what you guys think. So here's our UI. The drum beat is represented in the middle. We got the humanization dial on top and a bunch of menus. There's a variety of different grooves. Let's go with triplet field hip hop and press play. Yes. This is the quantized beat. Doesn't sound like anything. But then, turning the dial, you start to hear the swing. You can toggle realistic hit velocities on and off, represented by the height of those bars. We've recorded the samples at multiple tempos, so this model will interpolate between different source tempos. Now, because this model is, the parameters are fully scalable, you don't have to be at 100% humanization. You can go a bit below or above. You can exaggerate the humanization effect. It starts to sound pretty funky at the 200% mark. Or, of course, why not go into the negative? Minus 50%, minus 100%, anti-humanized triplet field hip hop. You heard it here first. Yeah. And of course, there's the bypass button for like quick comparison. There we go. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah.